John Piper, Discovering Joy and Meaning in Suffering. In the vast landscape of human emotions, there are few topics as profound and complex as suffering. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where pain seems to overwhelm joy, where the weight of sorrow seems heavier than the hope of relief? This is the territory John Piper navigates in his book, Discovering Joy and Meaning in Suffering. Let me tell you this. If you've ever felt lost in the midst of pain, you're not alone. Piper offers a unique perspective on how to find light even in the darkest places. Here's something you should know. John Piper, a renowned pastor, theologian, and author, delves into the heart of suffering and reveals how it can lead to greater joy and purpose. You might be wondering, what makes Piper's exploration so compelling? It's the way he connects the dots between pain and purpose, faith and hardship. In Discovering Joy and Meaning in Suffering, Piper shares his own experiences and those of others who have faced unimaginable trials. He doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of life, but instead, he uses these stories to illustrate how God can work through our suffering to bring about transformation. Here's a personal anecdote. Piper recounts a time when he was diagnosed with cancer. Instead of despair, he found a renewed sense of purpose in his faith and in helping others who were going through similar struggles. He saw his suffering as an opportunity to serve others and to deepen his relationship with God. The first lesson we learn from Piper is that suffering is not just a part of life, but a necessary part of living. As he writes, suffering is a gift that brings us closer to God and shapes our character. Let me tell you this. Many people avoid talking about suffering because they fear it will make them feel worse. But Piper reminds us that by facing our struggles head-on, we can transform them into sources of strength and resilience. Consider this. When you face your fears and challenges, you become stronger. You grow in faith and in your ability to endure. Another key insight from Piper is that suffering often serves as a catalyst for spiritual growth. He argues that it's not merely a result of our circumstances, but a choice we make. In other words, we don't just suffer, we choose to suffer. This perspective is empowering because it gives us control over our responses. Piper emphasizes that when we face suffering, we have the power to choose whether we let it define us or whether we use it to grow. For example, Piper mentions a woman who went through a severe illness. Instead of wallowing in her suffering, she chose to focus on her faith and her relationships. Through this process, she found a new level of peace and purpose. Piper also addresses the common misconception that suffering is always punishment for our sins. While sin does cause pain and suffering, Piper asserts that God often uses suffering to teach us and to draw us closer to Him. He explains, God uses suffering to bring us back to Himself and to help us see our need for His grace. Consider this. When we accept God's grace during our times of suffering, we open ourselves up to receive His healing and His provision. By embracing suffering, we move beyond our limited understanding of God and begin to see Him in a more expansive and loving light. One of the most powerful lessons Piper teaches is the importance of finding joy in the midst of suffering. He believes that true joy comes not from avoiding pain, but from choosing to trust in God and to believe that He has a plan for our lives, even when we can't see it clearly. He says, joy is not something we find, it is something we discover. Piper uses examples from the Bible to show how characters like Job, Mary, and Paul discovered joy in their suffering. He points out that while they didn't necessarily feel happy, they found a deeper sense of peace and meaning. To help us understand this concept better, let me share a story. A friend of mine went through a difficult divorce. She felt lost and alone, questioning everything she believed in. But as she leaned into her faith and allowed herself to experience the pain, she began to see things differently. She started to appreciate the moments of quiet and solitude, which gave her time to reflect on her life and her relationship with God. Over time, she found a new sense of joy in her relationships with friends and family, in her work, and in her faith. She realized that the pain she had endured had made her stronger and more resilient. Piper also emphasizes the importance of community in navigating suffering. He believes that suffering is a shared experience, and that when we come together, we can support each other and find strength in one another. He writes, "We are all in this together, and we need each other to bear one another's burdens." Consider this. When we face suffering alone, it feels overwhelming. But when we have a supportive community around us, we can lean on each other and find comfort in knowing that we are not alone. Finally, Piper encourages us to find meaning in our suffering by looking beyond ourselves. He suggests that we consider how our struggles can benefit others and contribute to the greater good. He writes, "Our suffering can be a means of blessing others and of glorifying God." Let me tell you this. When we focus on how our suffering can impact others, we shift our perspective and find a new level of purpose. We see our pain as an opportunity to serve and to give back to our communities. In conclusion, John Piper's Discovering Joy and Meaning in Suffering offers a fresh perspective on one of the most challenging aspects of life. He shows us that suffering is not just a part of life, but a necessary part of living. Piper teaches us that suffering can lead to spiritual growth, joy, and purpose. By choosing to trust in God and to believe that He has a plan for our lives, even when we can't see it clearly, we can discover a deeper sense of peace and meaning. So let us embrace our suffering, find joy in it, and use it to build a stronger, more resilient community. Remember, as Piper puts it, the greatest joy is found not in the absence of pain but in the presence of God.